Good morning and welcome to this brief workshop, Online Methods to Fight Fake News. This is a part of our common project, JUIBAD. I am Igor Vitale, I am a psychologist. My career started in work and organizational psychology. I have a degree in social work and communication psychology. After a few years, mostly in which I worked in the organizational sector, I started to work in a foreign country. I've been invited for the first time in Romania for holding my course, the first time in another country. And then from that day, I've been invited to be part of an Erasmus project. And after that occasion, it has been my main job, mostly now. The 70% of things I do are under Erasmus. The other 30% are training and consultancy. I will talk to you about the psychology of fake news because I think it will be very clear for us that it's important as a topic, it's important to discriminate true or false stories. But it's also very important how people read and understand news. Because I will show you that in some situations you can receive true information, but may have a misleading effect on how we detect information. So if we want to teach school students critical thinking and strategies to understand on the long term what is true or false, what can be a damage for them or not, we have to teach also how psychology impacts on how we read the news. It's very curious that in psychology, the only 3 Nobel Prizes connected to psychology are all connected to the same field. Consider that psychology is an applied science in completely different sectors. We have many different possibilities to apply psychology, but the only 3 Nobel Prizes are about decision-making and influence. And this is very curious. Because Nobel Prize, the first Nobel Prize I will talk about is 1904, and the last one is 2002. So we are talking also about a big part of the history. A first Nobel Prize in psychology was being awarded to Ivan Pavlov. Ivan Pavlov was a medical doctor that in 1904 received the Nobel Prize for having discovered the conditioning. Conditioning is a psychological strategy which is also relevant for fake news. Ivan Pavlov discovered that it's possible to condition behavior of animals, but also humans. His experiment demonstrated that it's possible to associate innate reactions, natural reactions to stimuli. And so it's possible to modify behavior. We all know that, for example, animals like dogs have a natural reaction if they see food. If you approach with food to a dog, he will increase the salivation. This is natural. Nobody has to teach the dog to do this. Me too. all animals, human also, of course. But Ivan Pavlov told something that maybe now is very clear, but at the time not. If you associate a stimuli, an artificial stimuli to presenting foods, for example, you present the food and you ring the bell, the dog will associate these 2 stimuli, will create a link of cause-effect, even if there is no effect with ringing the bell and the food. It's an association. It's something very different from presenting 2 stimuli. Presenting 2 stimuli is not cause-effect. He discovered that after a while, if you only ring the bell, the association will create a reaction in the dog. Only ringing the bell produces the increased salivation. The second Nobel Prize relevant for psychology is also about human behavior and decision-making. Herbert Simon won the Nobel Prize in 1955 in economics, because there is no prizes in psychology. And he's the father of the concept of limited rationality. Theories about economic behavior before Herbert Simon had one assumption: humans are rational, which is clearly a simplification. It's clearly a simplification. We may be rational, but we have limited capacity to analyze all possible variables. Economic theories before told, we decide based on cost-benefit ratio. Emotions are not implied in the economic behavior. And so how do you explain compulsive shopping, for example, or many other behaviors that are nothing rational? So Herbert Simon told, yes, humans are rational, but our cognitive capacities, our memory, and our attention are limited. And then the third and maybe the most relevant and the only psychologist in these three figures, because the first is a medical doctor, the second is an economist, and he's a researcher in psychology, is Daniel Kahneman, who's the father of the concept of framing. We can present the same problem in different ways. The information are exactly the same, but people will behave completely different based on how you frame the problem, how you use words. So I will show you that Daniel Kahneman demonstrated many times that you can present two truths told in two different ways, and you will have two completely different behaviors. So the topic about fake news is only about true and false, or it's also about on how you tell the truth. On a psychological perspective, there is also this second part. So, in forming these, in creating beliefs, we all receive information from the general media. There are mass media who expose us to the same information. But between information and the beliefs we create based on the same information, there is a critical factor. We do not accept the information completely and totally in their information. We receive, we analyze, and we tell, okay, this is credible, this is not credible, this is credible, but is not in line with my values, I can't believe it. This critical factor is between information and beliefs. And also, it's true the opposite. When we declare information, we always have a filter between what we think and what we say. There is a clear factor telling us this thought is possible to be said, is something appropriate, is something credible. This one is not convenient, is maybe breaking some social norms. In other words, we are always somehow deceptive. Could you imagine if we had no filter between our thoughts and our words? To be a real problem. And so, for example, if you do a basic task, a task in which maybe you don't need to tell something false, but let's say something simple. You have to introduce yourself in front of friends, or you have to introduce yourself in a personal selection situation. It's the same task, it's the same information. You will do this in the same way? Probably not. Even if, more or less, you say the truth in both cases. You don't have necessarily to lie in one situation. This is just to show you that fake news and false information is a daily practice, is common, because we have a filter in acquiring information, but we have also a filter in declaring information. We determine what to say. And this is not only a problem of the candidates of a personal selection. Also companies do this. Companies always present as the leading company in one sector. We have one clear problem in Italy about personal selection methods. For all job profiles, we have only one psychological description. I don't know if this is true also in other countries. But when we have job announcement, we have companies requesting people who are communicative, open to talk with groups, dynamic, and flexible. Is the same in Greece? Yeah. Yes. So you go there to evaluate a person, you ask for a self-presentation, and they say, I'm communicative, I'm flexible, I'm open to talk in groups. And you have to analyze. Of course, there is a part of deception. So, we don't have to be paranoid about this. We have to recognize that we have filters, and lies, deception, and omissions are very frequent and not always harmful. We say most of the lies to not break social norms. Fake news are so a daily situation, and we have to understand when a fake news or a false information may be dangerous for us. So I think that we have a continuum of variables. From people that trust everybody, they trust even unbelievable things. And on the other opposite, which is clearly pathological, we have paranoid thinking. People that believe that others are always creating a damage, even with imagination. I had many psychological cases with paranoid thinking. I have many of them that calls the private investigator. There are spies, there are people following me. There's nobody. It's a psychiatric illness. So, even if these two options are extreme and pathological, we are all, let's say, slightly disbalanced in, okay, I generally trust people, or okay, let me check. I think that we have to find a mediation between these two extreme concepts. And what we want to propose in this project is to increase critical thinking. I have no idea of the animation because I changed the computer, so can happen whatever. I don't know, but okay, it's critical thinking. Critical thinking is the ability we want to promote in students. I think the goal of a teacher should be to increase this variable first and to leave the autonomy to school students to learn through the understanding of information. So, apparently, it's very simple. We just have to pass through critical thinking. Reason more about information you receive. Too easy. There are many reasons why we don't pass through the critical thinking. The first one is that the mental effort is significant. We take decisions every single day. Every minute we decide, I want to talk with the person, I have to stop the conversation, I want to buy this, I want to remove this. We do continuously. Imagine if we use critical thinking and mental effort for each of these decisions. It would be impossible. So we have limited capacity to put this effort in every single decision. And this is one main reason why we don't use always critical thinking. Our capacity of memory and attention are limited. The space in our brief-term memory is 7 elements. This is the best option, but it can be 7 little elements. Some studies about psychology of decision mention that in most of our decisions, we mostly focus on 2 variables or 3. There is no time. And of course, we prefer mental shortcuts. We are economic in the mental effort we put in decisions. So, we will talk about cognitive biases. So that factor, that systematic errors that goes into action when we acquire information. If we can simplify a problem, we will do it. The first one is the heuristic of availability. Heuristics means mental shortcut. It's one kind of simplification we always do. We are not statistical machines. We are not able to do this. We mostly try to do some simplifications. For example, if it's asked to us to estimate if something is likely or unlikely, probable or not probable, the only thing we do is to go back in our memory to find possible cases we experienced. If yes, we will say it's probable. If we never heard about it, it will be non-probable. And we are biased because we focus on our experience, which is limited. So our mind do this equation. If it's easy to recall, it will be probable. There is a demonstration by a study that in the 80s asked to people to understand, to estimate what death factors are the most probable and compare the long list of possible death factors, death causes. And there was how much you estimate probable the chance to be killed by a shark, and how much is the probability to die through the heat of a coconut falling. Now, I don't meet shark every day, but even coconuts. So the answer is almost 0 in both cases. I don't go in these situations. But in a survey, in terms of perception of risk, which is not the risk, in terms of perception of risk, people believe which one of these two is the most probable?
Hit by a coconut.
Hit by a coconut.
Hit by the shark.
Hit by a shark. I'm asking what people believe.
The most chance to be killed by a shark is more than to hit by a coconut.
Of
But
course.
It's not really.
Yeah, it's not really. In reality, nobody, mostly nobody, okay. In a survey, that's correct, people considered that the risk of death due to the aggression of a shark was higher than the risk of death by the fall of a coconut. But in reality, the risk is very similar. You have mostly 0 cases. In the most severe years is 5 cases in the world. And so there is no risk to be killed by a shark, but coconuts may be much more dangerous. A published study in a peer-reviewed journal found that 2.5% of injuries in Papua New Guinea was determined by coconuts falling. 2.5 is a lot. COVID, and many times much less lethality. But the aggression of sharks is much easier to be imagined because in the 80s there was this film Jaws, which in Italian is Lo Squalo, that creating the image. And so you remember the image, even if you know that this is a film. It's much more lethal the bear comparing to the shark. It's much more lethal the mosquito through malaria. And I think even pigeons are more lethal than sharks because they bring infections. Repetition of the same news in all directions will increase the probability that you will take into memory something. So journalists can say always the truth, but only by the selection of news, of true news that may say, they will diffuse that that event is probable. It's not only a problem of true or false. It's a problem of the selection of news. What you will say. You have limited space, you decide what to say, you increase the chance, you increase the probability that the person will say, this is probable, because I read in the journal. So fake news is not only about information, but it's also about repetition and selection of information. Repetition is a clear method for manipulation. Do you remember one of the 3 Nobel Prizes in which there was a repetition? It was Pavlov, Kahneman, or the second one, Herbert Simon. It was Pavlov. You repeat the association. You show the association. It's exactly the same thing. For example, Veneto region. Veneto is the Venetian area in Italy. It's an Italian region. They've done a study in 2013 about the perception of risk, and it was one of the highest regions in Italy in terms of perception of risk of crime. But in terms of real crimes, it was the best region because it was with the lowest occurrence of crime. So they were completely opposite. They believed to have a lot of crime, but in reality was not. Do you know why? In that period, in Veneto region, there was a government and a party that was very popular that founded its political campaign in terms of fear against immigrants. It was very popular. People believed to be true. And even the Italian Institute of Statistics have done a statistic comparing the occurrence of crime in Italians and non-Italians and found no significant differences. But statistics, Italian Institute of Statistics is probably less popular than the power of this party to talk about fear of immigrants. This is the difference, because I can tell you something. This party can, for example, only select true information in which non-Italians committed a crime, and only communicated that. It's true or false? It's true. What's the problem? The selection. Fake news is not only about true or false stories. The repetition of messages leading fear against immigrants or reporting the country of origin only in case in which the criminal was also non-Italian led a misperception.
This happened in Spain as well.
Happened in Spain also, yeah. So this explains the differences between statistics and perceptions. When you're asked to estimate the probability that an event occurred, you will go into your memory and find if this exists. The second bias, so we are talking about 3 different biases, so 3 different systematic errors we do. If we understand this error, we also recognize when people apply techniques to doing this. This is the framing effect. This is Daniel Kahneman, Israeli psychologist, that demonstrated this together with another colleague called Amos Tversky. He shared the Nobel Prize with Amos Tversky. This is the Asian disease study, 1981. It seems much more recent because it reminds you the coronavirus, but it was a simulation of a problem. We had 2 samples of the general population exposed to a scenario. You have to take a decision in front of a scenario. So these 2 groups of information received the same problem with different words. Imagine you are a policymaker from a country, and there is a Asian infective disease. You have to take a decision to save people, because you are the responsible. And you have two programs. You can take program A or B. The only thing that changed in the two experimental conditions was this one. For the first group of people, the instruction is given like this. If you select the program A to prevent the spread of this diffusion, 200 people will be saved. If you select the program B, you have 1/3 probability that 600 people will be saved and 2/3 probability that no people will be saved. So the focus is you save people. But the implicit is if you save 200, you don't save 400. The second presentation of a problem is exactly the same thing with different words. If you select the program C, 400 people will die, which is exactly the same thing. If the program D is adopted, there is a 1/3 probability that nobody will die and 2/3 probability that all 600 people will die. Now, we are talking about the same problem. If we have rationality, we should assume that people will select programs exactly in the same way. So, I make you an example. What do you think is the probability or the option that moves more people to say, I want to go in the first program? What do you think is 75%? 72% of the participants in the game frame will say program A is adopted. So we go to save at least 200 people, so we are sure. We should expect that the same problem with the same output should bring to the same thing. Do you know what is the percentage? 22. It's 1/3. It's nonsense. It's completely different. There is no connection with these two numbers. It's the same problem. They are both truth. The implications are different. This is why Kahneman explains this. We have a loss aversion. So if we focus on the loss, we are much more restrictive, much more blocked in our action. Actually, we should be indifferent in positivity and negativity. The absolute value should be the same, but it's not. So framing is everywhere. It's not only about presenting problems, but even adjectives, even little differences in the way in which you present things will affect people. There is a very famous study comparing the perception of quality of meat. There was exactly the same meat presented to the general population. In one case, it was presented at a 75% of lean meat. The second exact same stimuli was interpreted as 25% of fat meat. Same meat, two labels telling the same thing. Tell me if this is good or not. Tell me if it's quality or not, fat or not. People was influenced much more by the label, which is telling the same thing, than from the meat. People eating this meat with this presentation stated that the quality was lower, that the flavor was worse, that the quantity of fat was higher, even if it's implicit that on the first part, of course, you have 25% of meat, and you have exactly the same formula. These studies are not performed only on the general population. There are very important studies done about wine with sommelier, whose work is to be perfect on the evaluation. This wine is 100 euros. They will say it will be better, even experts. This is something that happened in Italy. We have a company for the trains called Trenitalia, which is very famous for the delays, because it's always it's a total disaster. There are two main lines, okay? I'm in Bologna, so I'm in the middle. So if something blocks in whatever of the two lines, I will see this kind of delays. And as you can see, we had many situations in which all Italy was blocked, and they usually present it as a delay. Now they changed the word, and they are not using anymore the word delay. See here what they are declaring. Increased travel duration. Now it's now it's different. Now we can fly with the train. Or also, I was working for a resort, and this big resort had many things to sell: accommodation, food, recreational activities, spas, whatever. They wanted to increase the complete message. They have the full message, you know, so it's the more expensive. And the manager told me, Igor, I want to increase the probability that users will select this one, because of course it's the one leading to more, income. And so what we try to do with this strategy, even if full message to me is clear, nothing else to say, full message involves all the parts of the body. We tried in several periods to change the adjective. Instead of full, to using another adjective showing that message. Do you know which adjective led to increase the 50% of selection of the message? Romantic. Romantic. No, I don't think so. This is 300%. No, 50%. Full message instead of full message.
Complete.
Complete. No. Okay. No. Also because in Italian it's completo, okay, which is completo, which is full. Full is my English translation. Exotic. No, we were in the Dolomites, in the mountain. Alpine message from the Alps, from the mountains. This Alpine, I think, because I don't know, we just changed the adjective and seen the results. But I think creates some.
You will not have effect on me.
What?
With full message will be. I don't know what is Alpine.
I don't know, but Alpine is the Alps. So if you go there, you know that the Alps are the mountains. So create personalization, and it was actually telling the truth because there was Alpine herbal things inside. So Alpine is better than full. Full explain better than Alpine, but people frame products with adjectives. And also we've done this with activities. Activities in mountains. I worked in the Trentino region, which is full of mountains and outdoor activities. So in presenting things and interacting with customers, they was talking about mountain paths in terms of difficulty. And this was not effective because what is implicit in the difficulty? You can do it, you cannot do it. So we changed difficulty in challenging or expert. If it's a challenge, you can accept or not. Same thing. True. But the effect is completely different. I'm an expert, okay. And this is from the research. We've done several studies, and we've done several projects about how to increase healthy behavior in food. And so we studied the research about how you present food to children. And I've seen this study doing the same approach, just to show you that the adjective can move the frame of something and then leading to different behaviors. You can call, in a primary school setting, the carrots will be not attractive. In this study, we found that they increase the probability that children select carrots if you put an extra adjective. And the adjective that won in that study is X-ray carrots won because children found something in X-ray carrots. So you can use framing to do something good, because at the end, this is positive if you increase the chance that they do vegetables. The other option is to have only vegetables, but you cannot. You have to guarantee the variability. Fake news is not only a fight between true or false. And we can do a lot of questions about true and false differences. What is true, what is false? Fake news is especially how you say the truth. Because the false you cannot say. It's legally a problem to say false, clearly false statement. And so most of the people will move into true stories told in a specific situation. So the very important thing is how things are framed. We have to teach to school students how to recognize the framing. For example, we know that the simple fact of sharing news includes how much people estimate that an event is probable. For example, I don't know in your countries, but in Italy are very popular TV programs about crimes. In what of your countries is also true? Yes. Spain, yes? In Romania too. I know Dan Antonescu makes some programs. Do you know Dan Antonescu?
Yes, I know.
You know Dan Antonescu? Yes, Ocul Magic.
Personally, now with Antonescu Dan, it's the most criminologist in the police. Now it's
Retired.
Free time.
Yeah, yeah, in fact, he came in Rome at our conference. He was very free.
It's a private detective now.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So he done a program called Ocul Magic and Anchete Ceva. Da. 2 TV programs. I don't know how much are popular. In Italy are very popular. In the USA are very popular. So in both countries, the public opinion is that crimes and homicides are very frequent. Because on the TV, we talk always about homicides. And in Italy, we have very long trials. So one homicide is 15 years of programs. And so we overestimate the occurrence of crime. But statistics tells, for example, if we compare these 2 countries, that in the USA, we have 21,900 homicides per year. Do you know how many homicides we have in Italy? 287, much less. But even in Italy, we believe that the situation is like in the USA. If we compare with the population, we have 329 million population in the USA, approximately 60 million in Italy. And we have 1 homicide for 15,000 people in the US. 1 homicide in 209,000 people in Italy. So in the US, we have 14 times much more risk of homicides. But the perception is the same. Homicides is the biggest problem in Italy. Or if you like to use numbers in a creative way, it's 1,300 percentage points more, which is exactly the same thing of 13 times more, of course. If the newspaper shows very often that a homicide has been committed, people will overestimate the chance of homicides in one area. We are not statistical machines. We read things, we memorize, and we use as a comparison to say it's probable, because I heard in the news, by telling the truth. And of course, if you select only homicides of one specific category, that category will be salient in the public opinion, always telling the truth, and only by selecting information. These linguistic formulas are telling the false. No, you can discuss the strategy, but if you select only a part of the news and you tell only that part, you're telling a part of the truth. You're not telling the false. This problem is based on the fact that when you tell something, there is always an implicit part. You see the explicit, the clear part, you don't see the implicit part. One clear example of implicit communication, which is the biggest part of communication, in my opinion, is what you show and what happens when in a product you see that this product have not a particular ingredient. I'll show you an example. We have gluten-free cosmetics. Now, these products are cosmetics and they have in the front, so have to be visible, gluten-free. So, what?
It is not a brand.
It's not a brand, it's an information. So yeah, I have to tell you this is gluten-free. So this is a true information. These cosmetics have no gluten. But what is the implicit part? If you see gluten-free, they written gluten-free, so there should be a reason. What we know about gluten? There are people that have allergies, which is clear because in that case we have strong reactions. There are people having intolerance. Okay, so less clear situation because in this case intolerance to gluten lead to slight effects. You may have an intolerance who you may not know. And there are also diets telling remove gluten because gluten is bad. So what is the implicit assumption? Okay, if it's gluten-free, it's better, because gluten is bad. Nobody, I love gluten, nobody tell this. But there is something which is not said. Gluten is absorbed by eating. So if you have an allergy, you cannot eat gluten, you can use whatever you want. But if you think you have an intolerance, you think your diet is without gluten, you may assume this is better, because there is no gluten. They are telling the truth. The effect is misleading. It's completely not relevant if a cosmetic includes or not some gluten. This is a very famous chocolate bar in Italy. It's Kinder, it's from Alba, from Piedmont. And as you can see, we have the name of the brand, we have the name of the product, Kinder Maxi, and the slogan is, plus milk, less cocoa. Plus milk, less cocoa. This is in the front. It's very important. What is the implicit of plus milk? Milk is good, cocoa is always bad. In the 90s, the milk had a very good reputation. Today is different. Today you find 1,000 types of milks. Somebody said, yes, you give always the milk to the children before. If I talk to my childhood, milk was the ingredient of growth, of the bones, was something that everybody had to do. So plus milk is good. What is the implicit part and the problem? We have a milk with good reputation and cocoa associated with chocolate, therefore to something bad. But taken by itself as ingredients, plus milk, less cocoa is not saying something. Milk in a solid form can be solid only if you put some fat in the milk. Otherwise, it's liquid. So more milk means more fat. There's no other possible explanation in chemistry. Cocoa by itself is not fat, it's not sweet. It's fat or sweet because you add sugar. Yeah. So what is telling this fantastic advertising? More fat and sugar and less energy. This is the translation. It's true, more milk, less cocoa. But the effect is positive instead to be a clearly negative information. Plus milk, less cocoa is telling a disadvantage in the front. Nobody understood. In the equation, moreover, remind what is telling the limited rationality. You have a stimuli, you see that stimuli, and you focus on few things. If I talk you about milk and cocoa, I'm talking you about two good things at the end. But I'm moving your attention, I'm directing your attention and avoiding the big problem. If you talk about milk and cocoa, you will not talk about added fat and sugar, which is clearly described in the tables. You can read in very little fonts with the lens. And you can discover after a degree in chemistry that, of course, the milk in solid form is fat. So is Kinder telling something false? No. And then I want to talk you as a third fallacy, which is connected to the Ivan Pavlov principles, which is the effect, the fallacy of causation. We usually create causation among sentences. Just by putting sentences together, we have this causal connection. We strongly reject cognitive dissonance. So sometimes when we have contradicting words, we have also clear dissonance. This is relevant for fake news, since the way in which we conceptualize things is biased. There are some errors. I want to show you this example. In this example, as you clearly know, because the situation has been transnational, there have been big discussion about the coronavirus, and this article shows exactly what I think to be a misleading information. There was a fake news about forbidden flights for vaccinated people. You know that after the vaccine have been available, there have been a discussion. People without the vaccine have to fly or not, with condition, blah, blah. And there was an article telling, consider that some companies are deciding that the flights will be forbidden for people with the vaccine. You know why? This was the headline. Flight travels for vaccinated people. There is a risk of thrombosis. The CSC say, yes, there are risks. You will remember that among the 3 vaccines, we had one with an increased risk of a heart problem, especially thrombosis. It was a problem especially for youngsters. Young women had an increased level of thrombosis, which was probably higher than the risk of COVID. And so this journal that was against the vaccination proposed to show this news, which is more or less true, but is telling only a part. Now, we have to talk that we had even one USA president suggesting to use injections of alcoholic solutions to clean the veins against COVID. And we have the president of Belarus that proposed vodka and sauna against COVID. So even leaders sometimes tell very strange things. But the body of the articles explains something true. If you take a flight, there are increased risks of thrombosis. So the information was true. What was missing? The increased level of thrombosis was true for vaccinated and unvaccinated people. So it was true, but clarifying only that vaccinated. But there are no interaction between a medicine and the risk of thrombosis, which is increased. Some blogs by posting CSC interviews stated that some flights companies are thinking to forbid flights for vaccinated passengers. Some flight companies, who's the subject? Come on, it's clearly misleading. But imagine, in a limited rationality principle, how this can be problematic. CSC is not telling the false. During flights, there is an increased risk of thrombosis. But this is not telling something. All passengers has that kind of risk during flights. This and the timing of presenting this news together with the discussion about AstraZeneca created a mix. And information and you can be connected with something else without stating, creating causal connection by association. Nobody told something false somehow. So, in a minute we will do a break, because there will be a second part of the presentation. Fake news, this is the summary of my presentation. It's not about true or false stories. Our responsibility can be only fact-checking. It should be fact-checking, but we have to teach something else. We should integrate also the responsibility of how we say things. Thank you very much. Thank you.